The Italian Wine Podcast is the community-driven platform for Italian wine geeks around the world. Support the show by donating at ItalianWinepodcast.com. Donate €5 or more and we'll send you a copy of our latest book, My Italian Grape Geek Journal, absolutely free. To get your free copy of My Italian Grape Geek Journal, click Support Us at ItalianWinepodcast.com or wherever you get your pods. Grazie mille.
Welcome to the Italian Wine Podcast Book Club. Each month we select a great wine book to share. We chat to the author and get your opinions. Stay tuned as we read Between the Vines with the Italian Wine Podcast.
Hello and welcome to Book Club with the Italian Wine Podcast. This is the fourth episode of a new show focusing on the world of wine and writing. Each month we choose a book, chat to the author, listen to some extracts and explore the story behind the book. We'd really like your ideas and suggestions too. So if there's a wine book or a wine writer that you'd like us to feature, please get in touch. Today's guest is the English writer and researcher David Way. Hi David, how are you?
Very good, thank you. It's great to be here.
Good. Now, we're recording this episode during Vinitaly. In fact, it's the Wednesday afternoon of Vinitaly. So what has been the highlight for you this time around?
Yeah, so since COVID, the organisation of the fair has been much better. It has a more professional feel. It's still mildly chaotic, but probably in a good way.
I think that's part of the attraction.
Yeah. The highlights this year have been, of course, I've visited some Piemontese producers. There are a few here who I didn't know, so I visited them. But also I went, for example, to an Amarone masterclass where we were able to compare the wines of 2009 with the wines of 2019.
Wow.
So that was amazing. I probably needed to go to sleep in the afternoon, but that's life.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was fantastic.
Good. I'm glad you've enjoyed it. I tend to agree. The producers that I've spoke to, it sounds like it's been a really busy, but more importantly, really productive fair for them as well. We'll come back to the Wines of Piemonte shortly, David, but first, you're a distinguished wine writer and a researcher, but you initially started your career in the world of academia, and I wanted to ask you how you transitioned from the world of academia. What led you to the world of wine and wine writing?
Okay, thank you. Yes, so originally I studied, first of all, history at Oxford many years ago, and then I also did a theology degree, so I'm obviously an inveterate studier. So yeah, that really formed me in my professional life, most of which was involved in higher education administration, helping adult learners to both qualify for a profession and get a degree. How did I get from that to the world of wine? Well, of course, mainly because I loved wine. And actually, when I was learning Italian some years ago, I discovered that people knew nothing about Italian wine. And so I offered to put on a short course during the Italian learning episodes about the local wines of southern Tuscany, where I happened to be learning Italian. After I'd done that for a few years, I thought, well, I really ought to have a qualification in this if I'm going to go on doing wine education. So I then started on the WSET platform. So yeah, really that was it. So it has both love of wine itself and also an intellectual engagement with it.
Okay, that's interesting, and we'll come back to your involvement with WSET and your subsequent studies shortly. But just to linger on that love of wine that you have, was that something that began during your university time at Oxford, or did that come later in life?
A little bit, but nothing like some of my friends who seem to spend most of their time in the best restaurants in London and Oxford. I don't think I had the money for that.
Right.
No, really, it was a bit later. Began to buy wine a bit en primeur, so inexpensive Rhone wines. Then moved to Burgundy and all that. But it was really very strange for someone who has now gone on to focus on Italian wine. I really only got into it seriously after I had learnt Italian. So the love of the language came first,
right,
and then moved into beginning to understand something about the amazing complexity of Italian wine.
Okay, and with your academic background, does that shape your approach to wine and to wine writing?
So I think the big difference is that I always have a critical eye when somebody speaks to me about wine, and I'm constantly asking myself whether the claims that are being made about a wine can be validated in some other way. There might be some scientific basis, there might be continuous experience of growers, because as we all know, people make all sorts of claims about wine, some of which are true, or maybe true. So that's certainly made a huge difference. And the other thing is, and this really did affect the book in quite good ways, I hope, I also had the confidence to read the academic literature about wine, and particularly the studies from the University of Torino, which obviously have particular interest in Piemonte.
You mentioned that process you began of wine learning through WSET, and I know that led you to another significant chapter in your life, which was your struggle, if I can put it like that, to become a Master of Wine. And you've written extensively about that experience on your website. So the Master of Wine programme, for those who don't know, is probably one of the most challenging, if not the most challenging wine qualification imaginable. A grueling programme that can take years to complete. Can you tell us a bit about why you decided to embark on that process?
Okay, so I was still involved in educational administration in London, and therefore I looked around and thought, what can I do to learn most about wine while I'm still based in London? So, I can't go and plant a vineyard in southern France or whatever. So having, been reasonably successful in the diploma, I thought, right, well, the next option is the Master of Wine. And so I thought I'd have a go at that. And I had, several really fantastic years. I absolutely loved the theory part of it. So I sat the theory exam in 2015, I think it was, and passed first time, which was a fantastic. Most important was the learning, the 2 years of intense learning before that, and the many trips I went on. I didn't pass tasting first time, so I then had several more goes at that, and I got quite close to passing that, but in the end I didn't pass it, which is sadly the common experience. It's only about 1 in 10 students actually pass the tasting side. So huge congratulations to all the recent Italian Masters of Wine, Gabriele Gorelli, Pietro Russo, and Andrea Lonardi, who've done just that. Well done them. But it was I would still say it was a life-changing experience, because it gave me so much more of a deeper understanding of what happens in a vineyard, what happens in a winery, how that affects the style of the wine. And really it was that which gave me the confidence to embark on a full-length book on Piemonte. And it probably also got me my job at the WSET.
Yeah, interesting.
So,
yeah, we'll come back to that as well, but it's clear from your writing, certainly from reading your blog, that you view the process overall in a very positive way, despite not passing the practical tasting element. What is it in particular about the practical element that is so challenging? I understand you even employed the services of a sports psychologist to prepare you for that.
So I don't think the sports psychologist, he was a nice guy and he was a good person, but I don't think it really made an enormous difference.
Right.
I think the first thing to say is everyone is different and they have different challenges. And what I learned was that my tasting tended to deteriorate in situations of high pressure.
Yeah.
So, for example, if I would go and taste with a famous BMW, my tasting would always be worse than if I was tasting, with a blind with a group of friends at home or whatever. So I think it was partly psychological, but I never got to the bottom of that. I think also I improved dramatically when I learned a method, because the trick is not being able to guess what the wine is. The trick is being able to keep enough similar wines in the frame until the very last minute. And at the end you say, oh, because of this particular thing, I think it is whatever, Sancerre, whatever you think it is, rather than Sauvignon Blanc from South Africa. Okay. But the important thing is to keep the angle, the frame wide. The temptation always is to say, oh, I definitely know what this is, bang. Yeah. If you're right, you'll get all the marks. If you're wrong, you don't get any marks. Yeah. I think also I thought I was going to genuinely be able to blind taste any wine in the world and tell you something about it, about its location or its grape variety. Actually, it's a smaller range of wines than you might imagine, because they really focus on the classics. So I think I spent a lot of time rather unproductively
studying a wider range.
Yeah, studying a wider range.
Instead of focusing on the... Okay, no, that's very interesting. I have to say as well, I'm fairly new to the wine industry and have a very underdeveloped palate and really struggle with tasting side of things as well. I mean, I enjoy the cultural aspect and I enjoy drinking wine, but I've got a very poor palate, so I too struggle in that department. In fact, I was at a grappa tasting yesterday with Stevie, and it was a blind tasting of grappa, Scotch and cognac, and I, as a proud Scot, I have to confess, I confused the cognac for the Scotch. They were high quality spirits, each of them over 20 years maturation. But I went with what I had in my gut from the very first sip, and I think I just had in my head, this is the Scotch, and I refused to budge. Yeah. But obviously made a big fool of myself as the only Scotsman in the building.
We've all been there, let's be honest. Yeah.
So any tips, practical tips that you could give that helped you or that might help us with tasting?
I think that what you've just mentioned about being confident in your first impressions is really important, but then going back and checking them. So, let's say you have a, medium red in depth of colour with sour cherry notes and high tannins. You're immediately going to think, okay, this is Sangiovese. Fine, that's a perfectly reasonable guess. But then you need to go back and think, right, okay, why is it not Nebbiolo? Why is it not another high tannin, cherry flavoured red grape? So in other words, it's that checking process, which is really important, and making sure that all the evidence from the glass is actually consistent with your view, because it's so easy to decide to jump to a conclusion, particularly if you think you know what the wine is. Use your first impression. It's really, really important. You may well be right, but then check all the other parameters. Is the acidity correct? Is the style of oak likely to be consistent with the place? And so on and so forth.
Okay. Good. Another positive aspect that came out of this whole process, I understand, David, was you began work really then as an essay writer as well. And I understand you won numerous essay writing competitions. Can you tell us a bit more about that aspect of your wine writing and some of the exotic places you were fortunate enough to visit as a consequence?
Yeah. So this was part of being an MW student. So one of the things that the Institute of Masters of Wine does is to get sponsorship from countries, from regions, from large companies. And in order for the companies to get interest of MW students, who of course could be very powerful ambassadors for them in the future, they run essay competitions. And so they will set an essay title. How can we sell more white Bordeaux? Does New Zealand need to develop another grape variety along Sauvignon Blanc? Whatever it is they're interested in. So one of the helpful things that MW said at the beginning was, you all bring something very particular to this process. You might be a winemaker, you might have extensive knowledge of the world of selling wine. All these things are entirely relevant, and you need to concentrate on all the things that you're not good at yet in order to cover the whole field. So I thought about, well, what am I good at? And of course, having been educated in Oxford, I was good at writing essays, because basically in Oxford, as a historian, that's what you do. You don't really go to lectures. Basically, you have to write essays every week. So all these essays came along, and I thought, well, at one level, I need to know about all this stuff. So I might as well do the research, write the essay, see what happens. And as you said, I was really fortunate to win a number of prizes. But my crowning glory, undoubtedly, was, I should explain, this is quite funny. Yeah. My wife doesn't really enjoy travelling very much. She's used to coming to Italy now. She sort of regards it as a second home, but she's not really a natural traveller. So I came home one day and said, oh, by the way, there's an essay competition about New Zealand. And she said, oh, no, that would be terrible. So I said, don't worry, everybody is going to do this. The prize was 2 weeks in New Zealand. Wow. So I said, don't worry, everyone else is going to go, there's no way I'm going to win this thing, write the essay, etc. Forgot about it. And then about 6 months later, I got this email which says, Dear David, we're delighted to say you have won the New Zealand prize. So she and I went on this quite incredible trip where we visited 8 regions.
I'm curious now to ask, are these competitions open only to Masters of Wine, or
only to MW students?
Okay, so that's another good incentive to
that is an incentive.
Do the program.
Yes.
But also, I think another benefit of doing the program, aside from whether you actually complete.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
I learned so much through many of those trips and other ones which they simply put on for students and which you pay a small amount for.
Yeah, and nothing focuses the mind more than actually having to produce something, whether it's an article or a chapter or a book or.
Exactly, that's exactly right.
Good. Okay, before we turn to the Wines of Piemonte, your new book, just one final question then about your academic experience, and this in relation to the job with WSET.
Yep.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the organisation? I'm sure most of our listeners are familiar with WSET, and more particularly about your role.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. So WSET, we are encouraged to call it WSET, but WSET is fine. And that's what it's normally called in Italy. That's fine. So it's a 50-plus year old company which was originally set up to train the English wine trade. Then about 25 years ago, they began to realise there was a huge demand from consumers as well who wanted to just learn more about wine. In fact, that's exactly how I did it. I did it outside before I had a job in the world of wine. It offers 4 levels of study in wine. It also now offers sake, spirits, which is done for many years, and latterly beer.
Yeah.
We have just launched our first level 1 and level 2 beer, so it's all very exciting. I'm sure many of our listeners will know they have very professional books for levels 1, 2 and 3, but they never did that for level 4 diploma in wines because it's such a massive exercise. It's very strange that they didn't have a proper textbook diploma in wines, but they didn't. And they finally got round to having a post to help create those books, and that was the post that I got in 2015. And so my colleague and me, Victoria Mackenzie, MW, we were basically the 2 main writers for the 5 diploma in wines textbooks. And so, we did that over a 4-year period with the help of like 70 external experts who gave us basic material, which we then wrote in a consistent style. I was lucky enough to be the Italian expert as well as the writer for it, so that was a great experience. And then we also had another set of experts who checked what we had written. Since 2019, which is when it was all published, it's been my job to update it. So I've done over 4 years. I did a complete update of every single unit, and I've now gone down to 2 days a week doing the same job. And I have a new colleague who is in New York, which is really interesting, having a colleague who's a long way away. But she has amazing abilities, but also incredible contacts in the US, which we just don't have. So it's been a fascinating job. The only drawback of it is that, of course, we have to cover the whole world absolutely properly, or at least the principal wine regions of the world. And therefore, you can't really do anything in depth. You can't decide, I'm really interested in, southern France or whatever it is. I really want to write more pages about that. You have to think that everything has to be roughly in the right similar length as everything else, and also not just to overload students, because it's also already a massive qualification for students. So when I stopped being an MW student, I then decided, I'd like to do something in more detail, and then basically it was a question of which Italian region.
And of course, you decided to focus on Piemonte.
Yep.
Before we discuss the inspiration behind that book, then, do you want to give us a reading, David, from, I think you're going to read from the introduction.
Yes.
Okay,
so this is a short couple of paragraphs from the introduction. The top wines of Piemonte are among some of the world's greatest and most treasured wines. What is much less appreciated is the sheer range of wines and of local varieties in the region. It has 60 denominations and, coincidentally, about the same number of registered grape varieties, nearly all of them native. The region produces outstanding red and white wines for every occasion, many styles of sparkling wine, and worthwhile sweet wines. There is so much to explore here, even for those who love and already know about Piemonte's world-famous red wines. The purpose of this book is simple. It is to help wine lovers understand more about the well-known wines they rightly cherish, and, it is a big and, to go beyond their comfort zones and explore the remarkable range of wines made in Piemonte. This is equally true if you love the great wines of the region, such as Barolo, Barbaresco, Nizza, and more, or the region's hugely successful everyday wines, such as Moscato d'Asti, Gavi, and Barbera d'Asti. Piemonte has an unparalleled riches in terms of grape varieties, wine denominations, and wine styles. Rucche, Grignolino, Timorasso, and Abaluce lead a long list which makes wines as fascinating and diverse as the big 5, Nebbiolo, Barbera, Dolcetto, Moscato, and Cortese.
so that was from the introduction of The Wines of Piemonte by David Way, published in 2023. Can you tell us, David, what it was? You mentioned in that reading there, in fact, the unparalleled richness of the region. Is that what drew you to the region, or was there something else that led you to choose Piemonte?
One is, of course, the quality of the wines. I mean, these are world-class wines. Secondly, I knew a little bit about the diversity. To be honest, I did not understand the incredible riches that are there. I knew the names of the grape varieties, but I didn't really understand how good the wines were, how interesting they were, and there were lots of ones which I simply didn't know about. Then there was a really practical one about getting to the region. If you're going to write a wine book about a region, you have to get there. And it's very easy from London to get to Turin, to Milan, to Genova. There are lots of different ways which take you directly to different parts of Piemonte. And then thirdly, Janet, my wife and I, Janet, we drew up a short list of possible candidates,
Okay.
Which was Tuscany, Piemonte, and the wines of the south, particularly Campagna and Basilicata. So I love Aglianico, I love the white wines of the south, and we debated the merits of them. And Tuscany, in a way, would have been the obvious choice because I spent a lot of time in Tuscany. But in the end, Janet said to me, I think, David, you need a new challenge. So in the end, it was Piemonte which won the day. And it's proved to be an absolutely exhilarating adventure. And we have visited all 60 denominations and had a great time and made so many great friends here. So, yeah, it's a really good choice.
Interesting. And it sounds like there's definitely scope for a sequel, still chance for Tuscany perhaps, or southern regions as well.
Okay, I've sort of promised myself that I'm not going to start on another major project immediately. I really like to build on what I've learned about Piemonte because I just think there is genuine task to do in terms of getting people to understand, to get beyond Barolo and Barbaresco, great though they are.
Good. So you spoke in there about the viticultural diversity. Can you tell us a little bit then about what it is in that region that enables such great viticultural diversity? Are we talking about landscape, climate? What are the factors at play there?
So here I can draw on an academic background, as it were. So a couple of professors, led particularly by Raimondi and Anna Schneider, have done really remarkable studies on the interrelationship of grape varieties within northwest Italy. So that would be Val d'Aosta, a little bit of Lombardia and Piemonte. This publication is available in English, and they've shown that, for example, how closely related Nebbiolo is to Freisa, to Vespolina. But they've also shown, this is really fascinating, Piemonte has this, they're slightly strange from the outside world, but you get used to them when you're in the region. Aromatic and semi-aromatic red grape varieties, which often come in semi-sparkling forms, such as Ruchet. Well, Ruchet doesn't come in sparkling form, but the three Piedmontese Malvasias, for example, are often made in sparkling form. So those aromatic reds, Ruchet, which makes big, structured, powerfully aromatic wines with big tannins, and Malvasia di Casozzo, just to take that example, both related to an almost unknown grape variety called Malvasia aromatico di Parma. So what the academics have done is that they've done remarkable work on grape DNA and demonstrated the interrelationships between these various grape varieties. And they've even been able to hypothesize grape varieties which we can no longer find, which are the intermediate grape varieties between some of the ones we do have and some of the other ones we do have, which seems, to me as a non-scientist, that seems extraordinary that you can do that. But there is enough commonality in the DNA of the grapes to be able to demonstrate to a reasonable level of security that these grapes are related. So the reason why Piemonte has this amazing range of grape varieties, I think, is twofold. Clearly, there has been an awful lot of interbreeding between grape varieties over the years. And secondly, I think because until recently, most of Piemonte is not intensively cultivated with grapes. I know Barolo and Barbaresco are a great theme park, but elsewhere, there's still a lot of mixed agriculture, industry, swamps, rice fields, all sorts of things. So actually, a lot of local grape varieties have survived in very small places, because they haven't travelled, because they still are only where they are. But scientists have done all this work to demonstrate, first of all, to collect all these grape varieties, to catalogue them, to grow them in controlled conditions, and then to study the DNA. I think is the reason why there is this amazing grape diversity in Piemonte.
Yeah, and notwithstanding that great diversity, you explain in your book that the success of Barolo and Barbaresco, particularly in the North American market, has led to an export boom, rising land prices, surging wine tourism across the region. Does the success of those two great wines trickle down across the region, or are those lesser known varieties really just for grape nerds like yourself, dare I say it?
That's entirely fair.
With no real market viability.
Okay, that's quite complex to answer, but I'll have a go. So nowhere is as successful as Barolo and Barbaresco. You can go Nebbiolo in those denominations, you are going to get a price for your wine as long as it's good, which is quite unlike anybody else's prices. The only places that are beginning to rise a little bit are like Nizza, used to be a subzone of Barbera d'Asti, now is a DOCG in its own right. Top quality Barbera in the historic heartland of Barbera, beginning to have a little bit of a collector's market. So you can see there the influence of another great variety. Nebbiolo is beginning, of course, because of the success of Nebbiolo in the Langhe, it's beginning to be planted in other parts of Piemonte with some success. So Monferrato DOC, which is like a large regional DOC, has now got a category called Monferrato DOC in Nebbiolo. So that's beginning to create a market. But the other success stories are not really in the same. There are real success stories, but they're not in the same league. So Colli Tortonesi for Timarasso is a real success story. Nascetta, great variety in the Langhe, is another real success story. We'll talk about Alta Langhe later, I think, under the sparkling wine heading.
Yeah.
So there are some really great things going on. And my point is, these are wines of real quality. Good news for us consumers is they're not super expensive yet, and therefore now is the time to go in and discover them. For me, the challenge for Barolo and Barbaresco, after all, they can't plant any more vines. That all the decent sites are now gone. And therefore they're going to have to think, if they want to grow as growers, they're going to have to plant outside the denomination. And they are doing that either in the higher land above Barolo and Barbaresco for the climate reasons, or they're planting in other regions and making great wine, for example, Timarasso. I hope Barolo and Barbaresco producers will understand that it's important to develop the region as a whole.
Are you enjoying this podcast? There is so much more high-quality wine content available from Mama Jumbo Shrimp. Check out our new wine study maps or books on Italian wine, including Italian Wine Unplugged, and much, much more. Just visit our website, mamajumboshrimp.com. Now, back to the show.
We will come back to that question of the sparkling and some of those more trending wines in a moment. But let's take a second reading.
The second reading is about a tiny Nebbiolo denomination called Carema DOC. This is a small but special DOC, the only one devoted solely to Nebbiolo wines in the Canavese area. Canavese is north of Torino. Here the grape variety is known as Picotena, its name in neighbouring Valle d'Aosta. The village serves as the gateway between Piemonte and Valle d'Aosta, with its strategic position delivering spectacular views to both the north and the south, and of the steep, rocky slope on which the terraced vineyards are to be found. Indeed, vineyards are a bit of a misnomer here, as most of Carema is planted on a series of small terraces, many only accessible on foot. During the various wars between France and Austria, the flat, fertile land by the river was used to feed the soldiers, forcing the villagers to use the slopes of the hillside. The slopes are extremely rocky, and it is said that the village women carried soil up to the terraces on the hillside to make farming possible. In the past, much of the forested area that now surrounds the terraces was under vine, but this was later abandoned. The maximum extension in the past is thought to have been 120 hectares. In 2019, only 18 were still being produced, but creating really interesting Nebbiolo wines.
Very good. We are recording in the midst of the final few hours of Italy. I think they're busy trying to clear the arena, so I do apologise for any background noise. Okay, so that was a really interesting reading from the book on the Carema DOC, one of the lesser-known wine appellations that David has written about. Can you tell us something more about some of the new trends that are hitting the region or that we should know about in terms of sparkling or rosé wines or white wines that we should be aware of?
Yeah, of course. Piemonte is thought of as a land of great red wine, absolutely correctly. But I think what has happened in the last 20 years is that they now have really significant white wines to go along with that. Of course, historically, there was always Cortese in Gavi, which can make very good wine. And more recently, Arnais had its moment of real success from the 1990s onwards. But there are a couple of great varieties which every wine lover should know about if you have the chance to taste Nascetta, which is a grape variety local to the village of Novello in Barolo, producing really lovely, fragrant wines with interesting aromatics, really good acidity, which means that they can age as well. And then on the other side of the region, near Lombardia, we've mentioned Timarasso already. Timarasso is a real star grape variety, brought back from the edge of extinction bit like Viognier in the Rhone, 40 years ago. It was literally down to less than 3 hectares then. Now it's up to about 200. And Valtamassa in particular has rescued it, made wine from it, fortunately forgotten about the wine and left it in the cellar, and discovered that after 3 or 4 years it develops the most remarkable secondary characteristics, a little bit like Riesling. Mm-hmm. So when you taste Timorasso the first time, if it's a young bottle, you'll think, well, what's all the fuss about? It's a perfectly good wine, but give it 3, 4, 5, 6, even more years in the bottle, and it develops into this remarkable wine with all these interesting tertiary notes. I could go on. Baratuchat is another great variety which is beginning to have a bit of a vogue. Very high acidity, can make good, very sparkling wine with it. But so now I think there is now a really good offer of interesting white wines to go with the reds.
Yeah, that's interesting to hear about the renaissance or the rediscovery of some of those lesser known varieties and varieties that were perhaps on the brink of extinction.
Yep.
On a similar topic, Chapter 2 of your book is entitled The Growing Environment, and it explores some of the challenges around the diverse geography and climate of the region. What would you say is the biggest challenge currently facing winemakers in the region, and how are they adapting in the face of those challenges?
The biggest single challenge undoubtedly is the change in the climate. We've had a series of seriously hot, seriously dry years. At one level, that has been entirely, to the wine growers, entirely a positive, because whereas in the past we used to have 2 or 3 good years of Nebbiolo in a decade, we now have scarcely had a bad vintage in this millennium. I mean, some people say that 2014 wasn't great, but actually the wines now turned out to be really good. I'm talking about Nebbiolo here. The warming climate has been a real positive. Barolo and Barbaresco and other Nebbiolo wines are so much more accessible than they used to be. I've just tasted 175 examples of Nebbiolo at the Nebbiolo Prima for the 2020 vintage. And to be honest, you could drink those wines today. They are that accessible.
Yeah.
It's quite remarkable. So that's all the good stuff. The not so good stuff is that, years like 2017, 2022, 2023 were extremely hot and extremely dry. There were months or nearly whole years in which no rain fell at all. And of course, there's no water for irrigation, and there's no infrastructure for irrigation. So, it's completely different from Australia or South Africa or somewhere where you have the plant in place, and as long as there is water, you can irrigate. Piemonte just isn't like that. And also, most of the vineyards are very steep, so it would be extremely difficult anyway. So what have they done about that? Well, they've learned to improve the water retention in the soil by adding compost in particular, because as I've already said, some of these vineyards are on steep slopes, therefore the water tends to run away when it does rain. That's the other big problem nowadays. When it does rain, it comes in torrents rather than gently. And the lack of snow in the winter, it's been a massive problem. And the great value of snow is that it sits on the ground and melts slowly, and therefore the ground absorbs it, and then that gives you a sort of tank of water, as it were, in the ground, which the vine can use throughout the rest of the season. So better canopy management, very careful use of water, and beginning to think about digging ponds and lakes in order to preserve such water as does fall, rather than just running away and being lost. So a lot of work being done to meet the challenge of drought, along with high temperatures.
Speaking to any producer in Italy at the moment, climate change is just a massive issue. It's something that they're all too well aware of. In a way that I think if you live in the UK, where the climate is milder and there's less wine being produced for sure, but there's also a less proximity to the agricultural sector, there's maybe not that awareness of what the climate is doing. Here in Italy, I think there's a very deep understanding that the climate is changing.
Yes.
Your appendix in the book, it includes some details of where to stay and what to eat when you're in the region. So not only do we know everything about the wine from the region, we also have a few tips on travelling to the region. What advice would you give to someone visiting Piemonte for the first time? Where should they stay? What should they eat? And what, aside from discovering the region's wine, is there to do?
Okay, so if you're a wine lover, you're undoubtedly going to head to Alba, which is the city between Barolo and Barbaresco, and quite rightly too. I have no problem with that. I mean, I've written a book trying to encourage people to visit the rest of Piemonte, but of course you'll want to go to Alba. And I've really noticed in the last 10 to 15 years, it's become so much more of a wine destination. There are so many more restaurants, there's so many more really high quality restaurants. I mean, the food's always been brilliant, but there's a much more sophistication about the food now than there used to be in the past. Lots of little places to stay in the countryside. Actually, nothing now is cheap in Italy.
Yeah.
But there's a range of accommodation from, basic rooms in Alba to Relay, small, beautiful, handcrafted places. So undoubtedly you want to go to Alba. If you're brave, you'd go in the autumn for the Truffle Festival.
Yeah.
I say you have to be brave because the town is just so crammed with people.
Right.
Italians love truffles, as you know. And I mean, it's just chaos. You think you're there because of the wine, but actually the real deal in October and November is the truffles. And then secondly, I would say you really must also visit somewhere else. I don't mind where it is. So you could go to Nizza Monferrato for the Great Barbero we were talking about earlier. You could go across to Garvi, Eastern Piemonte, for the two great wine denominations of Garvi for Cortesi and Timorasso in the Colli Tortonesi. They're actually next door to each other. You could fly to Milan Malpensa, and then you're only like 45 minutes from the region known as Alto Piemonte. The Nebbiolo and Nebbiolo blends from Gattinara and Gemma is really easy to get to from the principal Milan airport. And what should you eat? Well, I mean, Piemonte has one of the most sophisticated cuisines in Italy, and that's saying a lot. It has incredible fine pastas of its own. It has truffles we've mentioned already, vitello tonato, which is a veal-based dish, which is incredible. Yeah, there's just so many beautiful things to eat. They take food as seriously as wine, which is really interesting. There's actually a university devoted to hospitality, wine and food in Piemonte, which tells you how seriously they take the food side of their culture.
Sounds wonderful. It's also making me feel rather hungry. One of the things you probably realise as well, Venezia is fantastic for wine, but not so great for food. Okay, let's take your third reading, David, and then we'll talk about the craft of being a writer.
Okay. So one of the topics I researched in some depth is the history of sparkling wine in Piemonte, and this is a little extract about that. Piemonte is an important producer of sparkling wine in terms of the volume it produces, its unique range of styles, and the quality of its wines. While it cannot match the sheer production numbers of Prosecco in the Veneto region, it has the much-loved tank method wines Asti and Moscato d'Asti. It also produces a virtually undiscovered range of other wines made in this way from distinctive local varieties, such as Bracchetto, various Malvasias, and varieties which today are normally made as still wines, such as Barbera or Fraser. To complement this tradition of tank method wines, it has now created a small but growing sector of high-quality, traditional method sparkling wines made with Pinot Nero and Chardonnay. Most of these wines are bottled in the denomination devoted to this style, which is called Alta Langa DOCG. What is much less well known is that this is a return to the history of traditional method sparkling wine in Italy. In the second half of the 19th century, long before Franciacorta and Trento DOC were established, traditional method sparkling wine was pioneered by Carlo Gancia in Piemonte.
So there you're talking about traditional method sparkling wine and its impact in Piemonte. The research, obviously, that is required to produce a writing chapter on that topic is obviously extensive on your part. Can you tell us a bit about the craft of being a writer, the research involved? What are your writing habits? How do you get in the mood for writing? Is it an academic process? Is it an emotional process? Are you drinking wine?
Okay, so as I think I said at the beginning of the podcast, I love studying, particularly actually in later life. I've enjoyed it more and more. So that's for me, that's easy. So I love going into finding a topic, getting into some depth, discover what other people have written about it. That's really important because we can't know it all ourselves. So I'm very happy to read Ian Dargater, very happy to read many other things that are published by good authors. For the book itself, I realised I had a problem in that I discovered that I didn't know there were 60 denominations. I might not have started had I known no. So basically, I adopted a method whereby I did the basic research of reading the regulations for the denomination, discovering exactly what the categories of wine you were allowed to produce if you wanted to use that particular DOC or DOCG label. I then went and found out how much wine was made under those categories, because for me, wine isn't just an enjoyable drink, it's actually part of the economy. And I want to know whether somebody, some of these denominations are making just 5 hectares. I mean, they're tiny, and some are even smaller than that, whereas others are really major players in the world of wine. And then having done all that, I would then taste the famous examples of the wine, if there were some. And then when there were grape varieties which I didn't really know a huge amount about, didn't have a lot of tasting experience of, particularly during COVID, I would just order a case of Fraser or whatever, a mixed case from an Italian online shop, and they would send them to me. During COVID, also the producers were amazing. They would send me samples to the UK. I would then interview them on Zoom. So bit by bit, I would put together the various dimensions of what I wrote about. And then I would use actual visits to fill out that, to check that I had enough good examples of a producer of Grignolino d'Asti or whatever the particular wine was. And I would use Vinitaly as well for that, because it's relatively easy to get an appointment here with a producer and, in an hour get an idea of their wines, interview them. So basically it was sort of like a giant jigsaw puzzle, which the structure was created by the history, by the climate questions, all those introductory chapters that I wrote, and then the areas, and within the areas, the particular denominations.
Yeah, I mean, it really is the most detailed and comprehensive account of the wines of Piemonte. And I think for anyone studying Italian wine or focusing in on that particular region, it really is absolutely essential reading. Certainly highly, highly recommended.
Thank you.
Moving away from the world of wine, what are you reading for pleasure? What's on your bedside table at the moment?
The honest answer to that is not enough. Because obviously this is a very intense project, and I was still working. Most of the time I wrote it, I was still working at least 4 days a week for the WSET. But I have enjoyed some people who sort of have one foot in the world of wine, but also have an interest in something else.
Right.
Such as like Andrew Jefford's Classic Wine Library produced a really nice anthology of his best pieces from decanter over the years. And the reason I really admire Andrew Jefford, and this goes back to a point we made earlier, is that, in his heart, he's really a poet. Okay, he's a great wine writer, and he's phenomenally knowledgeable about wine. But there's a romantic element to him. There's a poetic element, and he tries to convey. I think the biggest problem about being a wine writer is that we only have words. We only have words to describe something which is tactile, has flavors and texture, and I think Andrew's work is remarkable in that he tries to express some of that in a really I have colleagues at the WSET who can't stand him his writing at all,
right,
because they want to be objective about everything and just describe the process.
Yeah.
But I think he's taken a risk and wants to go beyond that.
He's somebody that we will be approaching in due
good.
course to have on the show. He's certainly a writer that I'm familiar with and whose work I appreciate. He's also, I think, written about Scotch whisky as well. I think he focused on the island of Islay, so I'd be really curious to have a conversation with him about Scotch whisky as well.
Yep.
For my part, I've also been incredibly busy over the last few weeks, so really struggled to find any time or energy for reading. What I've reverted to is audiobooks and podcasts, which I can listen to as I fall asleep in the evening or as I'm cycling to work in the morning. So one book that I've been enjoying is Shakespeare for Every Day of the Year by Allie, and it's a collection of plays, sonnets and poems with a commentary alongside.
Right.
And obviously Verona has its own connections with Shakespeare as well. So that's my top tip for the month.
Very good.
We'll add those books and some of the wines and some of the other details in the show notes for this show. David, what are your plans for the summer and what's next for you in terms of writing?
So for the summer, I've got some lovely trips in Italy, wine-focused trips. So I'm going to go to the event called Taste Alto Piemonte, and then I'm going down to Tuscany, San Gimignano on a press trip there, and I'm also coming back to the Veneto, or at least the edge of the Veneto, for Lugano. So that will be fun. Might go on a little trip to Sweden, more of a holiday.
Yeah, there's not much
in the
wine
summer.
there, is there?
There is wine in Sweden. I mean, this is really interesting, both in Sweden and Denmark. I'm not going for wine reasons. Let's be straightforward about this. This is more of a holiday. But it's nice to go somewhere cool in the summer.
Absolutely.
So that's great. In terms of writing, I have a possible project, which I'm still negotiating, so I can't really say a lot about it. But it would be focused on, recommending, if you want to know about Verona and Barbaresco, there are already lots of people who can give you advice about that. But I would like to do a publication which, of course, talks about Verona and Barbaresco, but also highlights some of the great wines that we've been discussing outside of the Lango as well. So that's a real possibility. And I'm also doing some vintage notes for people and that sort of thing. Yep.
Good. And where can we get a copy of your book, David?
Okay, so it's slightly complicated. The book was published by the Classic Wine Library. So if you just put in David Way Classic Wine Library, you'll get it immediately. You might be a bit surprised when you arrive on the page because actually you'll then be in the Académie du Vin Library website. And that's because after many successful years, the founder of this version of the Classic Wine Library has decided to stand back and has sold the company to the Académie du Vin Library. So if you now buy a copy of this book, it will have Académie du Vin on it and 2024 as the publication date. It's the same book, basically. It's just it has a different ISBN number and all that, simply because it's moved from one publisher to another. It's a really positive move because the Académie du Vin Library produces really lovely books. And they also have a bit more of a budget for promotion, so that's great. The Classic Wine Library will continue. It will be one of the lines, as it were, of the Académie du Vin Library.
Interestingly, our guest on next month's show will be Hermione Ireland. So we'll be talking to her about the life of a publisher and her work with the Académie du Vin Publishing House, as well as perhaps getting some tips from her on how to get your wine book published. So if you're an aspiring wine writer, that's one not to miss. David, thank you so much for being my guest on Book Club. I know it's a busy time and Vinitaly pulls you in many different directions, so thanks for coming and spending some time with me today to talk about your life and your work.
Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed it. It's interesting to reflect on the journey I've been on, and hopefully it's had a successful outcome in terms of this book. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining the Italian Wine Podcast Book Club. Tune in again next month when we'll get between the vines with another great wine book. Remember, our show notes, including full details of all the books we've discussed today, are available at italianwinepodcast.com or wherever you get your pods.